that grace proves its power in weakness. That grace proves its power in weakness. It's one of those core mysteries and paradoxes of our Christian faith. St. Paul in the second reading talks about the thorn in the flesh that he begged God to take from him, and God basically said no. You know, when you read the stories of the lives of great people, almost always in their story there's a thorn in the flesh moment. Sometimes that moment is a particular event, but sometimes it's a reality that lasts for months or even years. And what I mean is that in the lives of great people, you'll invariably find some great suffering, some great difficulty. You'll find a thorn in their flesh. There'll be some great obstacle for them to overcome in their life. And that somehow forms the very center of the whole story of their life. And in a way becomes a key to understanding who they truly are. And it seems to me that the greater the person, the greater their call to play a role on the world stage, the greater the thorn, the greater the struggle. It's 4th of July to think about a little bit of American history. Abraham Lincoln, one of our great presidents, this is clearly seen in his life. A lot of us know the story about him, but not a lot of people know that he suffered severe depression most of his adult life. You know, he had any number of political defeats, had any number of personal tragedies in his life. When he got to the White House, it was told that he spent many sleepless nights just wandering the halls of the White House. He tells us about, he shared a story one time with his cabinet that he had wandered into one of the rooms there at the White House and had a vision of the room filled with blood, all the blood that was being spilled during the Civil War. And he knew that somehow that rested on his shoulders. You may be aware that he had a young son, his only son, who died while he was in the White House. And that overwhelmed him with sadness. So he had this debilitating depression that plagued him. But did it destroy him? Not at all. And some say that it was that very weakness, that struggle with depression, that enabled him to have compassion, true compassion for the weakness of others, that enabled him to identify with the suffering that others went through, which made him in a particular way able to feel the suffering of a divided nation. And what made him able to say in that very famous second inaugural address, with malice towards none and with charity for all. It's well worth rereading that second inaugural address of his. There was another president, Franklin Roosevelt. Came from a politically connected family. He was bright, young, handsome. He had the world at his beck and call. But in the height of his power, his rise to fame, He was a very successful lawyer and involved in politics. He was struck with polio. His family encouraged him just to simply retire. They said, you can retire and not have to worry about anything the rest of your life. Just take it easy. Take care of yourself. Take care of your health. But his wife, Eleanor, and some other close friends urged him to continue on the path that he was on. After he had polio, became governor of New York and then, of course, president of the United States. And they say that he would never have had the depth of sympathy and compassion except for this thorn in his flesh. That his greatness didn't come from his own strength, from his own abilities and his own prowess, but from his weakness, which enabled him in a special way to identify with the poor, with the suffering, with the outcast, which enabled him to help lead our country through the Great Depression and then through World War II. All of us know about Mother Teresa, Saint Mother Teresa. Some of us even had the chance to meet her. She's probably the greatest saint of the 20th century. What not a lot of people know about her that came out only after she died, when her diaries were published, and when some of her spiritual directors started, and people that knew her intimately started writing about her life, is that she wrestled throughout most of her religious life with doubt and a kind of dark night of the soul. Yesterday we celebrated the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle, known as the Doubter. Well, the kind of doubt that Saint Mother Teresa suffered from was doubting in even the existence of God, and doubting His love for her. She had this terrible darkness and sense of doubt that plagued her. It's hard for us to imagine this. Did this undermine her sanctity? Well, maybe it was the very source of her sanctity. Because despite that doubt, she maintained what she knew God wanted her to do, who God was calling her to be. Maybe it made her most able to identify with those who had been cast aside, who felt abandoned, those who had lost their sense of meaning and their sense of purpose. St. Paul in this letter speaks to this today. And some of the most powerful parts of any of the letters that he wrote. So we heard proclaimed in that second reading, brothers and sisters, that I, Paul, might not become too elated because of the abundance of revelations. St. Paul was singularly blessed with this relationship with God, where God struck him blind, but God spoke to him. God spoke to him and then spoke through him. So he was given these very powerful revelations directly from Jesus. So he says, so that I might not become too elated, a thorn in the flesh was given me, an angel of Satan to beat me, to keep me from being too elated, to keep him from being too full of himself. 3 times I begged the Lord about this, that it might lead me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. That's one of those phrases from the New Testament that we need to write on a sticky note and put put on our mirror so that we see it every day. You know, that mirror that we have in our bathroom. My grace is sufficient for you. Power is made perfect in weakness. Because guess what? Everything in us wants to go against that. All of our natural instincts work against that. You know, what was this thorn in the flesh that St. Paul had? Was it something physical? I don't know. A lot of saints and scholars have speculated about what he really means there. Was it something psychological? Was it some type of deep anxiety? Was it something like what St. Mother Teresa went through? I kind of think that it could have been, because a lot of times in his writings you'll hear St. Paul say something like, I am the least of those called by Christ, because I persecuted the church. Remember, St. Paul was persecuting the early Christians with great zeal, even putting some Christians to death. Quite likely, you know, he carried that shame and that guilt about that his whole life. One of those things that plagues a lot of people is a sort of nagging self-loathing. Kind of in the back of our mind, there's this tape that's going around saying, you know, you're really a terrible person. You're lucky everyone doesn't know how terrible you are, because they would really hate you. So we don't know exactly what the thorn in the flesh was. It was not sin. It could have been a form of a temptation, but it was not sin. That's not what St. Paul, that's not what we're talking about here, sin. So we don't know, but we know it was terrible. And St. Paul says 3 times, what he means is that over and over and over, I ask God, please take this away from me. You know, every one of us has a thorn. In contemporary language, we call it a core wound. All of us have that. And yet grace is sufficient for us, God's grace. And in all those examples of Lincoln and Roosevelt and St. Mother Teresa, in their weakness, in the weakness, we see God's power at work. And it's because of that weakness that God was able to work, that they became who God wanted them to be. Not in spite of that, but because of that. Because of your suffering. Because of that thorn in the flesh. You're able to be who God truly wants you to be. You know, it's a mystery wrapped in the very mystery of the cross. That our power might be reaching its fullness precisely in and because of the suffering, this thorn in the flesh. So maybe, hopefully, we can say with St. Paul, I willingly boast of my weakness, because through God's grace, I am being transformed. I want to close on this 4th of July with a quote from Pope Pius XII. Before he was Pope, he visited the United States, and right after World War II, he wrote a letter to the citizens of our country. So I want to end with this quote from Pope Pius XII. The American people have a genius, he wrote, for splendid and unselfish action. And into the hands of America, God has placed the destinies of afflicted humanity. May the noble flame of brotherly love be kindled in your hearts. Let it not die, quenched by an unworthy, timid caution in the face of the needs of your brethren. Let it be not overcome by the dust and dirt of the whirlwind of anti-Christian or a non-Christian spirit. Keep alive this flame, increase it. Carry it wherever there may be a groan of suffering, a lament of misery, a cry of pain, and nourish it evermore with the heat of a love drawn from the very heart of the Redeemer. Amen. Amen.